Hi there. Welcome to Something to Talk About at the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center. And we are continuing our discussion of braiding sweetgrass. We'll get right to that, but I want to thank Fieldstone Communities of Bainbridge Island for helping to sponsor programs here at the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center. They offer day stay, respite programs, assisted living, independent living, and memory care. To learn more, to look at their wonderful facility or to check out their restaurant, call 360-594-1010 today. Also, we make a point of acknowledging that we are meeting on the ancestral homeland of the Puget Sound Coast Salish people, specifically the Suquamish tribe, people of the clear salt water who have been living on these waters and caring for these lands since time immemorial. We honor them, we're grateful for their hospitality, and we continue to look forward to opportunities to learn from them. And that fits in so well. It braids right in with Dr. Robin Kimmerer's work of learning how to put together science and indigenous knowledge. And the section we're going to be talking about today dives pretty deeply into that.
Well, and you have to add a third piece because you can't breed two things. You cannot make a braid out of two strands. So I'm thinking the third strand, I would say, is experiential. Experiencing the natural environment, right? Being part of nature and knowing that you are. Or maybe, that's my thought, maybe by the end of this conversations, the other people will have other ideas what that third strand might look like. But I thought this was a really, really rich, of course I always say that, right? A really profound section. Because, one of the things that really impresses me is that Dr. Kimmerer can make amazing statements without sounding judgmental, which I'm not able to do that a lot of times. It just oozes out.
I just want to make a remark about the fact that in these conversations, we're all in a discussion. So everybody can step up. I'd like to welcome Martha Korslin and Rita Riley for joining us. Anne Lovejoy has been doing most of the facilitating and writing up discussion points so that we actually go somewhere when we get together. So thank you for doing that very, very important job.
Right. And the hardest part is not underlining every single sentence because that sort of makes it a long lead in, right? I know. It's like I have a lot of, I have to move these little markers around because it's like, oh, and there's one. Oh, and there's another. But I think part of the point is this is a very rich document. Again, before we get started, I'm just going to say the usual housekeeping things. Given how things are going so far, I think the only thing I really want to just say again is I love the way we've been very respectful of each other's words and giving things a little time, sitting with people's statements rather than jumping right in to comment or respond or retort. And I think that's something that this book is really helpful for, the respectful listening piece, whether we're listening to the standing people, the trees, or we're listening to each other. It's always a good thing to just give it a little time. So that said, I would, as usual, ask if there was anything that really stood out for any of you in this particular session that you just carried away and kept thinking about. Anne?
Yeah, so I've been reflecting on what the author is saying about responsibility and reciprocity. And of course, she reiterates that throughout this whole section of, actually caring for things and being responsible about how we harvest and how we care for things. But I also think about it in terms of social interactions in the human world. And so when we think about responsibility and reciprocity to nurture and be one with or in balance with, harmony with, I think about interacting socially with people and the idea of like asking for permission to know something or to learn something, or the responsibility of impact, what kind of impact we have on each other, not just the land or the harvest, but on each other. And so I'm kind of reflecting on that and how I can be, I think, to me, what I'm thinking is that being more self-aware, like really take, like you were saying, taking a moment to respond or to, you know, provide input or whatever. That might help me with my choice of responsible impact on people, on our community, etc. And so I feel like I want to work on that a little bit.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you. Anybody else? Barbara?
I have so much to say about this chapter. I'll try and rein myself in. Because for me, it just sort of connected some dots about the whole environmental issues that we are trying to deal with today. And, you know, I've been thinking about this for a while, about the reduce, reuse, recycle is so sparse compared to, you know, so I'm writing in the margins here, reciprocity, regenerative, respect, you know, responsibility, that all those R's need to come into play. There was a line in here, this was the Black Ash Basket chapter at the end of that, talking about plastic and saying, it is so far removed from the natural world. I wonder if that's a place where the disconnection began. The loss of respect when we can no longer easily see the life within the object. And I just thought that was huge. And then also being responsible with your purchases. You know, are you buying something that's inanimate, or are you buying something where you can still see the life history of the object?
Yeah, in that same section, she talks about paper, which, you
Yeah.
know, we think of as basically just disposable. And since it's made out of the same thing as those baskets, trees, looking at, you know, thoughtfully using paper. It's a challenge in our, even in our quote unquote paperless environment, which is not at all paperless. We now have printers so we can make 5 copies of something.
Well, I've also been thinking of paper uh, as should have a category of its own in terms of thinking about consumption, that we have many items that are single-use paper. You know, office paper can at least be recycled, but, you know, the milk cartons that I buy are paper and they cannot be recycled. That's a single-use paper item. You know, if I buy frozen food and it's in a paper box, that can't be recycled. So that's a single-use paper item. So I'm trying to sort of expand my thinking to include that as a category, because that's otherwise that's just an invisible paper stream that we're not even thinking about.
Sheila, I think you had a thought.
I did, but Barbara, before I do that, what would you suggest about that as far as a single-use paper product?
I try not to purchase them as much as possible. I buy very few frozen foods. And then I feel guilty for the lactose-free milk that I do buy in the paper cartons.
Yeah, exactly. My almond milk comes in one of those. Indeed, it does. Yeah, because I'm not out there milking almonds. So
You can make almond milk, you know.
of course I could. Of course I could. I did have a thing about what we read here, and that had to do with the Three Sisters, which I remembered that reading that before and being absolutely in awe of the chapter itself. It does my scientific body and my scientific mind good to read that, to see the different connections between the three of them, which makes all the sense in the world, of course. And it's just beautiful. It's beautiful. The harmony of it is just gorgeous. I thought, though, when I thought of that, I also remember being at Machu Picchu and the terraced the terraces that are at Machu Picchu are all done nutriently for nutrient reasons, with the different types of nutrients coming from the top ones down to the next one, to the next one, to the next one. And it's sort of the same kind of that harmony and living together and being reciprocal. And the one at the bottom getting the most of what was above it. It was just, to me, I happen to remember that when I was at Machu Picchu, the person talking about that. Thank you.
And that kind of contrasts, the beginning of the Honorable Harvest chapter opens up with that scene, which to me is just heartbreaking, of the sterile field. Her farmer neighbor has planted corn in this field and used so much pesticide and so much herbicide that in between crops, nothing grows there, no weeds, nothing, right? And then they'll plant the corn again. And, you know, in that kind of conventional agriculture, the thinking is the soil is a medium that holds the plant upright so you can put artificial fertilizer on it. I'm not even kidding. That's actually true. And the wastefulness of treating land that way, and reading even in scientific journals about how practices that leave plant waste in the fields is wasteful and it should be harvested and have something done with it, instead of thinking, oh, you know what? If you ground up all those corn stalks and left them there, they would break down and feed the earth and replenish the soil. But it's this crazy use it and lose it thinking that, I don't know, for me, that was like the most heartbreaking of all the pieces.
It's so interesting when you compare that to the discussion of the harvesting of sweetgrass, where you are removing things, but not everything. I mean, that was that little very short chapter was also enlightening about the idea that there are ways to be a manipulator of the environment that is respectful.
Don't take the first, don't take the last, take only half. I actually grew up hearing that in New England, of course. New England, there's lots of rules for everything. Use it up, wear it out, make it do, or do without, right? Am I right?
Yes, you are.
But I love that too, that figuring out that as plants get domesticated, they need us as we need them. And those three sisters, those are all domesticated plants. Like you were saying, Sheila, that they have become habituated to human interaction and they can't survive on their own. Barbara.
This is along the line with the Honorable Harvest. There's a paragraph, short paragraph, where she says, cautionary stories of the consequences of taking too much are ubiquitous in native cultures, but it's hard to recall a single one in English. Perhaps this helps to explain why we seem to be caught in a trap of overconsumption, which is as destructive to ourselves as to those we consume.
I had actually written down a question. Can anyone think of a story or a folk tale in English that talks about the perils of taking too much? And I could come up with a couple. I thought of King Midas, I guess, in a way, right? The golden touch, where if you turn everything to gold, you can't eat gold. It's kind of like that, I guess. And then what about the old woman in the vinegar bottle? And she got the wish from the fish. Remember that? She kept wishing for more things and more things and more things. And they finally, she ended up losing everything she'd wished for because she was too greedy. Nobody else ever heard that one.
Golden goose.
Goose.
A different one. John Fawcett just joining us. Thank you.
Bringing his famous librarian skills to the mix.
Marginal at best.
Anybody else? Did anyone else think of a story, an illustration for that? Because it made me think too that like part of our white colonialist culture is to take everything and waste it. Take too much, take more than we need and waste it. That story she told about going to that college and giving a program on sustainability and then having lunch and how all the leftovers got thrown in the trash. And then when the Turkish woman comes up and says, oh, you remind me of my grandmother who used to make me lie in bed at night and say, thank you, roof tiles. Thank you, rice. Thank you, right? And how she said, I'm embarrassed in the cafeteria every day, but I can't say that to people. They wouldn't understand that when you talk about waste. Now, that book was printed in 2014, so probably written in the, early parts of this century, right? Already some things have changed. I think recycling has picked up speed somewhat. I think wasting less food has gotten more airplay, but I think we still are an incredibly wasteful.
Well, we have our, 3 buckets here at the senior center outside of the food where we get coffee and treats. And it's a hodgepodge. People, and you see it actually. You see people walk up, look, and then decide they're not going to make a decision and just throw the stuff wherever it is. I think that's part of that thing that Barbara was talking about, the plastic, about not seeing the light. I mean, it's just a commodity when you're holding that coffee stirrer, and you don't think about the fact that it could actually rejoin the process pretty easily if you put it in the green one. And it's going to make a much harder route for it if you put it in the black bucket.
It seems to me that in communities of abundance, that the misconception of wastefulness is leaving things. Because you want to basically harvest everything and make it available to everybody because you want more than enough. And I think the philosophy just fails to see harvesting more than you need as wasteful. I actually think it falls right in with a philosophy of abundance. It's counterproductive because at the end you end up with less instead of more.
And it does. I mean, I can't think of a book that is more full of a world of abundance than the world that Robin Kimmerer is describing. I mean, it really, everything is a gift in all directions.
Did anyone notice that the little story she tells in the middle of that about the grad student of hers who was invited on a rice collecting journey in canoes, and how they went around and collected, and she said, how was it? He said, oh, it was fun, but it was so inefficient. I told them I could make a little machine that would get at least 85% more of the harvest. And they said, oh yeah, you thought that was wasted. People aren't the only people who like rice, I don't think the ducks would keep coming back if we stripped every possible, right? We didn't leave anything for anybody else. It would be a different world. And I don't know that she mentioned that the guy got the net or not, right? Like, we didn't find out what he thought of her response. But I think that is so typical of like our idea of what's wasted. I think when you look at our ideas about land use, highest and best use of land means raping, pillaging, and destroying. Sorry, soapbox.
Say it, sister.
Barbara, you know what I'm talking about. You spend so much of your life trying to help us be responsible in how we throw things away.
But I mean, the thing that was so touching, which I think was what Barbara was touching on about this, to me was that if we have, she has the earth, the humans in her basket weaving, and then I think it's spirit is the third rung that kind of holds everything or lets it bloom or something anyway. The idea that if we are actually communicating, if we're knowing that the earth is thanking us or loving us, that's what she says. The earth is, if we can feel that coming back, which is not a very Western scientific thought, it changes the way that we might have a relationship with it. And that's going to take some serious relearning.
Well, one of the things, we used to go to Islandwood with the Odyssey classes when my kids were little. And they would have their meal, and each table, they would weigh the waste at the meal. And when they brought this to the kids' attention, so you only take what you need, don't take more than, you can always go back and get more if you need it, but just take what you need the first time around. So the first day is usually tons of waste for every table. And then once they realize that, oh my gosh, then it becomes a competition. And there's almost no waste by the third day there. The kids only take what they need. They're very conscientious about all of it. And part of it is they're kind of in competition with the other tables as well. But it's, I don't know, regardless of the impetus for the message, as long as they get the message, I think that's the big thing.
Right. And their first approach was that abundance that you were talking about. It's like, I want to make sure I have enough to eat without having to get up again.
Yeah.
I better take more now because somebody else might take what I want.
And am I the only one going back?
Well, it proves true with deviled eggs, I think.
Rita, what struck you?
Well, you know what I think, I've been just thinking about this. When Ann Olin talked about the reciprocity of our relationship with each other, and I think there's so much waste in just our relationships with each other. And to me, that's to me, that is really important, especially as we get older, that it's so much that we waste because we don't always listen, or we think we're not interested, and it's just a waste. There's so much that we can give to each other, and we are so part of a braid. I mean, humans all over this world, we are all basically the same and want the same things. We do. And if we can just kind of figure out how to maybe stop and listen and just go, oh, maybe one day we can all live in peace. That I think would be really so important. And I know all this other stuff, the waste with the food and the products and all the stuff we have and our relationship with the earth and stuff is really important stuff. But to me, our relationships with each other are the most important thing there are, because when we take the time to do that and to be in relationship with other people, and it's hard, being in relationships with people is hard, whether it's family or friends or you're on a committee or what the heck, but I think that is the most important work that we can do, because out of relationships with each other comes our abilities to live with each other, to live on the earth, in the earth, with the earth. That's my take on it.
And the gratitude.
Say again?
And the gratitude for those relationships too, Rita.
So Dr. Kimmer is calling us to be in relationship, in a listening, thoughtful relationship to the planet too, right?
Right, yeah, right, exactly.
And if you
Yeah,
take it that
and
way-
I'm not saying that's not, I mean, that's all important, but to me, the most important stuff that we can do to braid together is that human relationship, because out of everything that's human on this earth, we're either going to destroy it or we're going to save it. That's just my take.
I absolutely love the story of the three sisters. I just think it was the way they personified the whole thing, the fact that it's a symbiotic relationship. That when Western Europeans saw the gardens with the three sisters, they figured that the indigenous folks did not know what they were doing because it was so messy.
Right?
Yes.
Not understanding the three, the relationship between the three. And we planted the three sisters this spring, and we didn't do it all in one mound. We had them all in the same area. Next year, I think we'll do it all in one mound just to see how it turns out. And we got, it was okay. The deer came through and ate everything, so we had to fence it and start over. And that was mid-June. So we got a late start. But next year, it's going to be better. And I don't know, it's just fun. And especially if I'm working in my garden and I got her reading this book in my earplugs. It's just, I don't know, it just resonates. Hopefully I'm understanding some of this stuff, and I will take it to task and actually apply it as I move forward.
Right.
You made me laugh because I was thinking one year I was on the garden tour when I was in one of the many, I've lived on like 8 places on Bainbridge so far. And one of the beds I had made a bunch of beds, and they were all kind of wing shaped rather than in straight angles and things. And one of the big wing-shaped beds that had the most sun and the best soil, I did the Three Sisters thing. And there was a bunch of it, right? And people came on the garden tour and they were all looking at it going, what are you doing? What is this? And I tried to explain, these are traditional techniques, and look, they're looking really good, right? And you're like, well, you can't grow corn like that. It's like, well, actually, it is growing and it is right there. Well, it was so funny because people will argue with what they're seeing if it doesn't fit what they think it's supposed to look like. And the idea of planting in rows and having everything rowed out. And the cool thing about the three sisters is not only the symbiotic relationship of how they grow together, but how they rot together too, right? Like all of those pieces of leaves and stuff, they're all full of nutrients that will feed exactly that crop.
Right, and you've got nitrogen fixing right in the package, right?
Exactly, it's all
Yeah.
there. How cool is that, right?
One thing I noticed is the corn standing by itself had tons of weeds at the base, and had the squash been planted there with it, it wouldn't have, because the weeds wouldn't have got any sunlight.
Exactly.
Oh.
Also, when the big leaves of the squash are covering the soil, that keeps the top inch of soil a little bit moist, and that's like an optimal growing condition for all the feeder roots, which are just right there into the soil. So it
The
actually.
corn feeder roots, which are shallow, right?
Yeah, you know how they come out like little adventitious buttresses, right? And if you have that big squash leaf covering it, that soil bubble stays a little moister. All the soil life, all the biota, that critters that are living in that soil do much better. They're flourishing, so your crops are bigger. It's like making your own plant food out of what's at hand just by not messing with stuff. I love sustainability, but I know that it doesn't look right to a lot of people.
Doesn't look pretty, doesn't look tidy.
Doesn't look tidy.
Well, I think tidiness is like Western toxin.
Right, exactly.
Mother Earth News had an article on indigenous community gardens 2 issues ago, 3 issues ago. And when you look at the pictures, of course, my expectations kick right in because I'm looking at it going, where the hell's the garden? All I see is a bunch of stuff just growing everywhere. And no, they understand the relationships between the plants. That's why it's growing like that.
Uh-huh. Some years ago, I took some eco groups to Costa Rica, which is like it has the most life zones of any place in the world because it's right at the juncture of South and Central America. And it has incredibly varied topography. So there's like this incredible amount of life. And they, 50 years ago, started doing a practice which was indigenous practices, but is now called agrofloresta, which is like gardening in the forest, right? And they use all the native plants woven together with plants from all over the world that are plants that are edible crops. But so the ground covers are nitrogen fixers. There's, palm trees for the different kinds of things. There's banana trees, there's coffee and tea and all the shade tolerant plants like that, all growing together in what looks like a total mishmash if you don't know what you're looking at. But they're so extremely productive, and they're being planted on places that have been stripped of all land, of every living thing to make room for cattle. Right? And when the cattle business bottomed out because they destroyed the land and there was not enough anything left in the soil to even grow grass, they started replanting with all these native things and bringing them back, the land back to rich productivity.
Yeah.
And here's these amazing little gardens that were like overflowing. It was awesome.
And that reminds me of the mention of the bison and how they would graze. And so they were never, destroying any particular habitat. They'd eat something and then move on and leave a little compost packet behind, and it would be several months before they come back and eat there again. And it worked. It was always something for the buffalo to eat and something to grow, room for the grasses to grow. But it requires space, time, and distance.
Well, and the reason, and buffalo were shot because white people wanted the land and they wanted to get rid of the buffalo so the native people would.
They also thought if they got rid of the buffalo, the natives would go with them because that's what, but the idea just that nature requires space.
Right, and time.
It doesn't fit in a box.
No.
Like,
Nature doesn't do a lot of straight lines.
That's true.
No,
That's very true.
cattywampus. Yeah.
And Olin, I see you laughing. Does that make you think about it?
Hold on, cattywampus, yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's a good word.
Anybody else got a thought? Susan, you want to jump in?
You have to unmute. Thank you.
Muted myself. The line that caught my attention on page 148, middle of the page, was just about everything we use is the result of another's life. I think that's really powerful, but that simple reality is rarely acknowledged in our society. But that idea, I mean, as you know, I work with textiles and fiber and so on, and that's when you talk about, you know, students becoming aware of where food comes from. I worked with students who had, you know, talking about where their clothing came from and where it went, and they just had simply never thought about it before, you know, and that was that's I think when it comes to just about everything, your clothing, just everything that's closest to your body is warrants being aware of it. I'm wondering, in this group, has anybody here ever lived anywhere except on the coasts, one or the other coast?
Oh, yeah.
Where have you lived, Lynn?
Lynn, you'll need to unmute yourself.
You're also muted. You are muted, Lynn. You need to unmute. We can't.
Good.
I'm joining you from Cherry Hills Village, Colorado today.
Oh, my home state.
I joined when I was in Paulsville last summer, and I sort of come and go. And I have not read the book, I'm ashamed to say, but I wanted to see what it was all about, and it sounds fascinating. And I will get a copy of the book, and I will leave now, but I will hope to join you next time. And thank you for being so cheerful and informative.
I'm really glad you're going to read. I'm glad you're going to read this book, because I think you'll find where you are, there's a lot that will apply to what you see all around you. Sorry, Susan, you wanted to say some more?
That's okay. I lived most of my adult life in Colorado.
Where?
And it is a very complicated place in a lot of ways, and really interesting place to be, and a lot of environmental consciousness and political awareness, very similar to the Pacific Northwest. But I spent a week back in Iowa this summer, and I lived for 3 years while I was doing doctoral work in it's a few years ago, and I was back there this summer, and oh my God, where do you start to begin to change that? I mean, we can sit here on our comfy little island, affluent, it's all get out in terms of the world, and talk about what we can do, but the cat's out of the bag. I mean, go back to Reaganomics. I'm sorry to bring up politics, but there was an intentional drive to get rid of all these small farmers who had, you know, who were kind of doing things right, and get into commercialization of farmland. And now you go back, and it's when she mentioned corn and how closely it's grown together, that hybrid corn, you can't walk in a cornfield anymore. Because it's all grown together, and most of that is going for ethanol and to feed animals. And the animals, of course, are not on the land, except in Amish country, they're not on the land. Amish people are still mostly organic and so on. But that was just stunning. The level of waste was amazing to me, that I experienced just being back there. And they're very concerned now with the I subscribe to a couple of Substack things from people who live back there, and they're very concerned about what's going to happen with electric cars. Most of their corn is being raised for ethanol. So what are they going to do? So they're saying, well, we've got to find alternatives. Well, what are the alternatives? They grow whatever the government pays them to grow. And this all goes back to changes that happened years ago. And I just can't even wrap my mind around it, what it's like. And I just know I quit eating meat after I lived there, for a variety of reasons. That's probably the best thing you can do for, you know, environmental stuff. But I just tried reflecting on it and trying to understand it how people who are supposedly so close to the land depend on the land. I guess that's what Kimmer is getting at, is that there's, it's just there to be used, and until it's used up, and that's what's happening. But they're not growing food that we eat anyway. They're growing food for the gas we used to drive around in. But even at that, I hadn't even seen styrofoam for years, and I would go in places, there's still styrofoam plates. People are eating off of styrofoam dishes, and you go into even sort of a fast food takeout place, and I'd come out with more stuff that was used to hold it than there was food. And this just seemed to be what the whole area was like. And I was so glad to get back here and live in my little bubble of people who were thinking differently about these kinds of things. But it's, I don't know, it's like you need to do a residence on a farm in Iowa and understand what they're up against. I think 60% of them are non-resident farmers. I mean, their kids have inherited the land. They don't want to live there, and it's all run by lawyers and accountants, and it's just, I don't know where you go from that. I mean, Kimmer is beautiful. I couldn't agree with her more. But when you look at the scale, I don't know. And in a way, I'll just say one more thing, and then I'll be quiet. But that article about the chapter about, let's see, what was that called? The teaching of grass. I took to that because if anybody ever doubts that academia is brutal, there you have it. Oh yeah. And that I think also similarly shows what someone is up against. If you're trying to do something that is more consistent with what Kimmer is writing about, and you're up against these enormous educational and social forces, it's very difficult.
Yeah, it's of a piece of what you were saying about Iowa. It's like the situation has changed so much this is what we require of an academic paper, and we think we already know the answer.
Well, I don't think I agree with that, but it's just that there are, with procedures, with consistencies, people can show that there are different ways, but you're up against people who have been trained in other methods and are not so open. Which I think was what the chapter made. I don't think it's quite that rigid that they figure that they already have all the answers, but
Well, they make a hypothesis that harvesting will do more damage than leaving the crop alone, and it turns out, at least in the case of sweetgrass, no, it's the ignored crop that goes away.
It's also, there's an old book called The Theory of Scientific Revolutions. It's really worth reading. I should go back and read it. And that says that progress doesn't happen in a really kind of slow evolving way, that progress happens in fits and starts. Somebody comes up with a new theory, a theoretical model, and you have a whole generation trained in that theoretical model. And then there'll be one person who says, I don't think so. And they do some experiment, and it turns it all upside down. And then you go through the whole process again. The Theory of Scientific Revolutions. It's really an interesting book. Another interesting book on this topic is called The Farmer's Lawyer. It was written by a woman who, obviously a lawyer, but she goes back to the 70s when the start of the whole farm crisis. How many people have even heard of the farm crisis or even knew what happened in the Midwest and the Dakotas and so on, and how the federal government under Reagan basically went after the farmers, and how methodical that was, and how evil it was actually. But you read that book, and she spent 10 years writing it, but she spent just about as much time developing the court cases to defend, I think they were called the North Dakota Nine, something like that, because they tried to fight this and they always lost, but she won. And it goes through that trial, and that will tell you more about what you're up against, what's happened to agriculture, and how hard it would be to make those changes. than anything I've read lately. Anyway, this is something I actually think about this stuff a lot, this kind of thing a lot. I think about food sources a lot. I think about where we get our clothes. I think about where we get our food. It's just something I think about a lot. I don't usually have a chance to actually be around people who might listen to what I had to say. But I do have a little group, some of them are in Iowa, and they are all trying to do things better, actually growing food on their land. And it's just I think you have to get out of, I don't know, I think you do have to understand how these people who are really trapped in these commercial situations are going through too. So anyway, but that's enough.
There was a piece in one of the stories about the trapper who tried doing a bunch of different things and how he felt when he was working for a farmer in a huge industrial machine, 12 feet off the ground in a little enclosed, and that's what farming has changed people. They're not living on the land anymore. A lot of them are not. But what's really fascinating to me is that there's this full circle thing happening. She does talk about how when she and her graduate student presented the first time, that the word was pretty dismissive. And then I thought again, well, that was in 2014 when this book came out. And since then, there's been quite a lot more respect given to Native voices and Native traditions. And remember I sent an article to you right after we had our first discussion. I think this came out that the National Science Foundation put a great deal of money into a large grant to work with coastal people in the Northwest to discover what sustainable clamming techniques could be adopted by the commercial industry, which I thought was fascinating.
Yeah.
It's like, oh,
Yeah,
people here
you have to look at those, the smaller examples, and for hope in the end. I'm thinking about a woman I know. There are a lot of women farmers back in the Midwest, and one woman I know was an engineer and decided she didn't want to spend her life sitting, looking at a computer, and so there was farm land in the family farm, farmland. And her grandparents had worked very hard. Her parents had worked very hard. All the kids went to college. They were engineers and doctors and stuff. And she remembered being on the land, on her grandparents' farm. And she decided she wanted to go back and grow food for people, organic food. And she wanted to just have, I don't know how many acres she has now. And when she called her grandparents, they were stunned to silence. And they said, "But honey, that's why we worked so hard, so you don't have to." And she said, "But this is what I want to do." And she went back and she met another farmer, and they married. Now they have a little girl, and they're raising a little girl on the farm. And they're raising, I think, one of the larger CSAs in the state now. But the idea that, farming at that level, and we're talking about that, really a lot of work. Those were really hard lives that people live. We may romanticize them, but those are hard lives too. And I'm just kind of looking at all the different facets that get involved here too, and what people are capable of doing, the scale that they have to work to, I guess.
Thank you, Susan. I think, Anne, it looked like you had something you wanted to.
No, I don't remember now what that was.
Sorry.
I was going to mention Suzanne Simard, the botanist in, is that right, in Vancouver, who similarly faced a lot of challenges. I think was the inspiration for the novel about the trees.
The Mother Tree.
Yeah, she wrote The Mother Tree was her book.
Right.
And the idea that there's been a lot of effort to try to capture in the terms, as Dr. Kimmerer is doing, in the terms that are understandable to the academic world, what is known through indigenous knowledge and how that can be transferred. And those two strains can braid together with something else, compassion.
Need something else. One more. Maybe it's reciprocity. How about you, Joan? Do you want to have anything to share?
Looks like she's muted.
Not really, but I was just thinking about Montana and how people want to come back there again and do the same thing that Susan is talking about, and how it's gotten totally out of hand. Everything is. And the movie making it's come in and they've sold Montana out. And that is so sad to me. But anyhow.
But we do have a whole panel of Montana youth who are successfully, so far, suing the state of Montana for destroying their future, right? Because of the extractive industries that have, which I have to, full disclosure, I have cousins who lived on a dude ranch and raised Appaloosa horses, and then a uranium mine was, the government took the ranch by eminent domain because there was a large uranium deposit there. So the ranch was destroyed. So they're living with a very different situation than they were 40 years ago, right? But that's the kind of thing that these kids have taken to the state Supreme Court in Montana, saying we want our state back, we want our soil, we want our water and our air, we want our future. I think that's really pretty impressive. Jerry, I know you just started reading this book. What do you think?
You need to unmute. Sorry.
So one of the things I started doing was I had a need for taking notes because I was realizing that there was so much out there. And so I started taking notes, and I was taking notes on bookmarks. And it was just like, oh my God. And I put the page number there so I knew what those words were, whatever. But what struck me, it happened to be on page 179, was restore balance, locate ourselves once again in the circle. And I thought that was really kind of cool because there is like a circle of life. And I happen to be on a self journey of care, and I have a circle. And in that circle, when a day comes that something comes up and it has to do with me and me alone and how I saw something, I put that in the circle, because everything outside of the circle is something I have to accept or I acknowledge or I see. I might not agree with it. And I thought, for me, that just happened to be, and I'm working on balance of where I am in my community, in my life, that type of thing. And I just thought that was kind of cool that I just picked that out about a circle and the balance is important. And I like whenever everybody talks about you plant all these things and they all have different things that goes to the soil and it all goes back. And I just think that's just awesome. And I've gone to where I get out of the straight line of planting and I put different things together and one over there. And I've had people go, well, why'd you do that? It looks odd. It's like, I know it does look odd, but isn't it cool?
Somebody gave me a sign that says, welcome to the Wildlife Center, to put in my garden.
Did anybody read Botany of Desire?
Uh-huh.
There's a chapter in there about growing potatoes, and he has the corporate version where he's talking about this guy. It's just this barren landscape, and he's just fertilized it with chemicals, so it's all gray. It looks like a moonscape at this point. And so he asked him, he said, why do you choose this? Well, I got a big contract, McDonald's or Burger King. He was growing basically French fry potatoes, so he had to grow russets, and evidently where he lived, russets are susceptible to some sort of blight, fungus, pest.
Rust everywhere. They're super susceptible.
Yeah, so then he goes down the street and he talks to this guy, 10 acres. He and his wife are doing a completely organic thing. And he's talking to him about what you grow, what you do this. He goes, russet potatoes. He goes, well, this is when he finds out that there's this blight and stuff like this. He goes, well, what do you do about that? He goes, it's easy. I don't grow them. I grow something else.
Yeah, I like it.
It's too much work.
Right? And that's the thing. There are like 5,000 varieties of potatoes. If you go to Peru, they just had a potato festival in Peru. And it was like, seriously, it's incredible. And the ones that we have are the ones that were bred for shippability. I'm not kidding.
And so we think those are the good ones. And so that's what we want, even if we're, well, the story of the corn, the idea that, that sort of the Western farming of corn is you change the landscape to support the corn rather than pick the corn that will work in the landscape.
Or plant the corn in a way that the corn can thrive, right?
Yeah.
I know, it's so manipulative. And it's the idea, this is a big thing for me in gardening too, that like the English tradition, which a lot of people admire, is all about, it literally was written about the hand of man. Is like, that's the sign of God, because God loves man best of anybody on the earth, right? And so where you can see the hand of man, because nature doesn't actually make cube-shaped hedges. It doesn't do that, right? And so it's this whole thinking of like taking nature, manipulating it, proves how advanced people are. And you think, somewhere we got our wires so crossed on that one. And it's so interesting to me that indigenous cultures all over the world have the idea of reciprocity. All over the world have this idea of gratitude, gratefulness, of sharing, of giving back, of not taking too much. And somewhere Dr. Kimmer said something about the ancestors that had so little were the ones that were the most grateful and the most appreciative and the most thoughtful about what they did take, whereas the people who have the most are the least thoughtful, the most wasteful. And you think, is that some genetic flaw that gets tripped when we exceed a certain safety limit or something? I mean, I'm really curious, like, why is Western culture so contagious? Barbara?
Well, this chapter really was a juxtaposition with, or an illustration of the opposite of our current culture's obsession with rugged individualism and self-made people, and you don't need any help from anybody. And that's we've ended up with a really sad, unhealthy, lonely culture with that kind of mindset. And it's also contributing to the destruction of the planet. Whereas this really appreciates the richness of connection between people and the earth and people and all people, the tree people and fish people and us. And so it just makes me feel like our culture is just sad.
It kind of returns to Rita's point.
But we don't want to be sad. We want to have hope, because people are at the core, they're awesome, and they want to give back and they want to care for people. But sometimes we have to give people the opportunity to do that. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we don't, as a community or even as an individual. You go, I mean, I've held up my hand before and go, and so for whatever reasons. But I think that there is the goodness of people all over the world is greater than the evil that's in the world. That's just how I think about it. And I know it seems so overwhelming because there is so much going on, but within our own little community, we can do what we can do. And then it goes out. It's like when you drop a pebble in the water, you have all these ripples and you never know where it's going to end up. You never know when you smile at someone walking down the street where that's going to go. And you know what? It doesn't make any difference. We don't have to know. Mm-hmm. But it's what we are maybe called to do, or what I'm called to do. At least say hi to everybody, and dang it, I'm saying hi to you and I'm on my walk in the morning. You don't have to say hi back, but I'm going to say hi to you and smile at you. So we just don't know. So I'm just saying there is hope, and that we as a people will overcome the evil in the world. That's my talk for the day.
Rita, I think you brought up a word. I thought you brought up a word, Rita, we really haven't talked about, but it's really important. And I do. Every time I see you, I know I'm going to have a happy interaction where you are succeeding. I love that about you. But you brought up the word opportunity. And I think to some extent that may be overlooked a little bit. Like, there are opportunities to do things, but we don't recognize what those opportunities are, or, as individuals, what can we do? And what are the opportunities for alternative ways and so on. And yeah, education comes down to that.
Well, and I think planting those seeds of compassion, they'll spring up maybe when you're not there.
Exactly.
And things can change quickly. I know I was commuting to work with a gay woman who said that she could not ever imagine that in her lifetime that there would be marriage equality, that was a bridge too far, that was just, we were pushing too hard for that because that was just going to cause so much pushback. And she was as surprised as the rest of us that we did it. And it happened very quickly, and it's not going to go back. And so there are moments where we see that there's been enough seeds planted, enough little weeds of change growing that it can. And yes, you're the Johnny Appleseed of optimism. Well, I want to thank everybody for this rich conversation. And when are we meeting again? We have a little bit more to go here.
So on Monday, October 30th, we're going to do Braiding Sweetgrass.
The next section.
The next session is in relationship to the land, basically. So we're, even more of that. Monday, November 13th, we're going to do Burning Sweetgrass, which is kind of self or the community connection to the planet. And on Monday, November 27th, we're going to have the epilogue, and which is a really short section, but we're going to talk about returning the gift, beyond gratitude, how to live out reciprocity in our lives, and what are our takeaways from that. So I'm looking forward to that one too, because I think, that's where we're going to help each other figure out what small steps we might want to take.